They were barefooted, and their dress was in other respects disarranged. There was one named Arlott, the daughter of a tanner of the town, whose countenance and figure seemed to have captivated the young Baron. He gazed at her with admiration and pleasure as he rode along. Her complexion was fair, her eyes full and blue, and the expression of her countenance was frank and open and happy. She was talking joyously and merrily with her companions as Robert passed, little dreaming of the conspicuous place on the page of English history which she was to occupy, in all future time, in connection with the gay horseman who was riding by. The etiquette of royal and ducal palaces and castles in those days, as now, forbade that a noble of such lofty rank should marry a peasant girl. Robert could not, therefore, have Arlott for his wife, but there was nothing to prevent his proposing her coming to the castle and living with him; that is, nothing but the law of God, and this was an authority to which dukes and barons in the Middle Ages were accustomed to pay very little regard. There was not even a public sentiment to forbid this, for a nobility like that of England and France in the Middle Ages stands so far above all the mass of society as to be scarcely amenable at all to the ordinary restrictions and obligations of social life. And even to the present day, in those countries where dukes exist, public sentiment seems to tolerate pretty generally whatever dukes see fit to do. Accordingly, as soon as Robert had arrived at the castle, he sent a messenger from his retinue of attendants down to the village, to the father of Arlott, proposing that she should come to the castle. The father seems to have had some hesitation in respect to his duty. It is said that he had a brother who was a monk, or rather hermit, who lived a life of reading, meditation, and prayer, in a solitary place not far from Falaise. Arlott's father sent immediately to this religious recluse for his spiritual counsel. The monk replied that it was right to comply with the wishes of so great a man, whatever they might be. The tanner, thus relieved of all conscientious scruples on the subject by this high religious authority, and rejoicing in the opening tide of prosperity and distinction which he foresaw for his family through the Baron's love, robed and decorated his daughter, like a lamb for the sacrifice, and sent her to the castle. Arlott had one of the rooms assigned to her, which was built in the thickness of the wall. It communicated by a door with the other apartments and enclosures within the area, and there were narrow windows in the masonry without, through which she could look out over the broad expanse of beautiful fields and meadows which were smiling below. Robert seems to have loved her with sincere and strong affection, and have done all in his power to make her happy. Her room, however, could not have been very sumptuously furnished, although she was the favourite in a ducal castle, at least so far as we can judge from the few glimpses we get of the interior through the ancient chroniclers' stories. One story is, that when William was born, his first exploit was to grasp a handful of straw, and to hold it so tenaciously in his little fist that the nurse could scarcely take it away. The nurse was greatly delighted with this infantile prowess; she considered it an omen, and predicted that the babe would some day signalize himself by seizing and holding great possessions. The prediction would have been forgotten if William had not become the conqueror of England at a future day. As it was remembered and recorded, and it suggests to our imagination a very different picture of the conveniences and comforts of Arlott's chamber from those presented to the eye in ducal palaces now, where carpets of velvet silence the tread on marble floors, and favourites repose under silken canopies on beds of down. The babe was named William, and he was a great favourite with his father. He was brought up at Falaise. 2 years after his birth, Robert's father died, and his oldest brother, Richard III., succeeded to the ducal throne. In 2 years more, which years were spent in contention between the brothers, Richard also died, and then Robert himself came into possession of the castle in his own name, reigning there over all the cities and domains of Normandy. William was, of course, now about 4 years old. He was a bright and beautiful boy, and he grew more and more engaging every year. His father, instead of neglecting and disowning him, as it might have been supposed he would do, took a great deal of pride and pleasure in witnessing the gradual development of his powers and his increasing attractiveness, and he openly acknowledged him as his son. In fact, William was a universal favourite about the castle. When he was 5 and 6 years old, he was very fond of playing the soldier. He would marshal the other boys of the castle, his playmates, into a little troop, and train them around the castle enclosures, just as ardent and aspiring boys do with their comrades now. He possessed a certain vivacity and spirit too, which gave him even then a great ascendancy over his playfellows. He invented their plays, he led them in their mischief, he settled their disputes. In a word, he possessed a temperament and character which enabled him very easily and strongly to hold the position which his rank as son of the lord of the castle so naturally assigned to him. A few years thus passed away, when at length Robert conceived the design of making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This was a plan not of humble-minded piety, but of ambition for fame. To make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land was a romantic achievement that covered whoever accomplished it with a sort of sombre glory, which, in the case of a prince or potentate, mingled with, and hallowed and exalted, his military renown. Robert determined on making the pilgrimage. It was a distant and dangerous journey. In fact, the difficulties and dangers of the way were perhaps what chiefly imparted to the enterprise its romance, and gave it its charms. It was customary for kings and rulers, before setting out, to arrange all the affairs of their kingdom, to provide a regency to govern during their absence, and determine upon their successors, so as to provide for the very probable contingency of their not living to return. As soon, therefore, as Robert announced his plan of a pilgrimage, men's minds were turned immediately to the question of the succession. Robert had never been married, and he had consequently no son who was entitled to succeed him. He had 2 brothers, and also a cousin, and some other relatives, who had claims to the succession. These all began to manoeuvre among the chieftains and nobles, each endeavouring to prepare the way for having his own claims advanced, while Robert himself was secretly determining that the little William should be his heir. He said nothing about this, however, but he took care to magnify the importance of his little son in every way, and to bring him as much as possible into public notice. William, on his part, possessed so much personal beauty, and so many juvenile accomplishments, that he became a great favourite with all the nobles, and chieftains, and knights who saw him, sometimes at his father's castle, and sometimes away from home, in their own fortresses or towns, where his father took him, from time to time, in his train. At length, when affairs were ripe for their consummation, Duke Robert called together a great council of all the subordinate dukes, and earls, and barons of his realm, to make known to them the plan of his pilgrimage. They came together from all parts of Normandy, each in a splendid cavalcade, and attended by an armed retinue of retainers. When the assembly had been convened, and the preliminary forms and ceremonies had been disposed of, Robert announced his grand design. As soon as he had concluded, one of the nobles, whose name and title was Guy, Count of Burgundy, rose and addressed the duke in reply. He was sorry, he said, to hear that the duke, his cousin, entertained such a plan. He feared for the safety of the realm when the chief ruler should be gone. All the estates of the realm, he said, the barons, the knights, the chieftains, and soldiers of every degree, would all be without a head. Not so, said Robert. I will leave you a master in my place. Then, pointing to the beautiful boy by his side, he added, I have a little fellow here, who, though he is little now, I acknowledge will grow bigger by and by, with God's grace, and I have great hopes that he will become a brave and gallant man. I present him to you, and from this time forth I give him seisin of the duchy of Normandy as my known and acknowledged heir. And I appoint Alain, Duke of Brittany, governor of Normandy, in my name, until I shall return, and in case I shall not return, in the name of William my son, until he shall become of manly age. The assembly was taken wholly by surprise at this announcement. Alain, Duke of Brittany, who was one of the chief claimants to the succession, was pleased with the honour conferred upon him in making him at once the governor of the realm, and was inclined to prefer the present certainty of governing at once, in the name of others, to the remote contingency of reigning in his own. The other claimants to the inheritance were confounded by the suddenness of the emergency, and knew not what to say or do. The rest of the assembly were pleased with the romance of having the beautiful boy for their feudal sovereign. The duke saw at once that everything was favourable to the accomplishment of his design. He took the lad in his arms, kissed him, and held him out in view of the assembly. William gazed around upon the panoplied warriors before him with a bright and beaming eye. They knelt down as by a common accord to do him homage, and then took the oath of perpetual allegiance and fidelity to his cause. Robert thought, however, that it would not be quite prudent to leave his son himself in the custody of these rivals, so he took him with him to Paris when he set out upon his pilgrimage, with a view of establishing him there, in the court of Henry, the French king, while he should himself be gone. Young William was presented to the French king, on a day